A black man in Depression-era Texas couldn't lift himself onto his horse. White ranchers rushed to help him mount. In 1930s West Texas, where racial hostility defined social relations, that scene should have been impossible. But Daniel Webster Wallace, 80 John to everyone in Mitchell County, had earned something more valuable than tolerance. He had earned respect. By 1939, the man born as property 3 months after his mother was sold owned 9,280 acres of prime Texas ranch land, commanded a herd exceeding 600 cattle, and left an estate valued at over $1 million, equivalent to $22 million today. His wealth would have been remarkable for any Texan. For a former slave who never saw his mother freed, who ran away at 15 with nothing, who learned to read at age 25 as a second grader, the achievement bordered on miraculous. This wasn't inherited wealth. This wasn't luck. This was a man who saw cowboys riding past cotton fields and decided that would be his life, then spent 60 years making it happen through calculated decisions, cross-racial partnerships that defied Jim Crow expectations, and business acumen that made him one of the most respected cattlemen in West Texas regardless of race. The story of how Daniel Webster Wallace became 80 John reveals patterns about post-Civil War Texas that challenge simple narratives about race, opportunity, and the American West. The cowboy culture of 1870s to 1890s, Texas created spaces where competence mattered more than skin color. Not because racism disappeared, but because the brutal demands of cattle drives, bronc breaking, and frontier ranching required cooperation that sometimes transcended racial barriers. Wallace operated within these spaces brilliantly, building relationships with white ranchers who became genuine partners and friends, while never forgetting the economic realities that slavery and its aftermath had created. His path from bondage to millionaire rancher wasn't about overcoming racism through individual excellence. Though excellence he had, it was about identifying where opportunities existed within a racist system, exploiting those opportunities ruthlessly, and building economic power that commanded respect even from those who might have preferred a different social order. The Victoria County plantation where Wallace was born in September 1860 operated under the rhythms of cotton agriculture that had defined the Texas Gulf Coast since the 1820s. His mother, Mary Barber, had been sold to the O'Daniel family 3 months before his birth, a transaction that separated her from William Wallace, Daniel's father, who remained enslaved elsewhere. The timing meant Daniel never knew his parents together, never experienced family in the way that even enslaved families sometimes managed. The O'Daniel plantation near the small town of Inez wasn't among Texas's largest operations, but it was substantial enough to require dozens of enslaved workers, maintaining cotton fields, tending livestock, and performing the endless labor that made plantation agriculture profitable. Daniel grew up watching free men, cowboys working cattle for the O'Daniels and neighboring ranchers, ride past fields where enslaved people chopped cotton under supervision. The contrast planted ideas. Emancipation came when Daniel was 4 years old, too young to remember the transition from slavery to freedom. For Mary Barber and many formerly enslaved people in rural Texas, emancipation changed legal status without immediately changing material conditions. The O'Daniels offered continued employment, chopping cotton, harvesting crops, performing manual labor for wages that kept workers perpetually in debt. Mary accepted because alternatives didn't exist. She had a child to feed, no land, no capital, and limited options in an economy where former slave owners controlled most resources. Daniel grew up in nominal freedom that felt remarkably similar to bondage, working fields he didn't own, living in housing provided by the O'Daniels, earning wages insufficient to accumulate savings or purchase land. The work was brutal. Cotton chopping under the Texas sun, bent over short-handled hoes for hours, callousing hands and breaking backs. Daniel hated it. But the O'Daniel sons, Nilton and Dial, became Daniel's childhood companions. The families maintained this relationship throughout Daniel's life, a connection that challenges easy narratives about post-slavery Texas. These weren't distant employer-employee relationships. The O'Daniel boys and Daniel Wallace played together as children, maintained friendships into adulthood, and remained in contact until death. The relationship's nature remains somewhat opaque in historical records. Did genuine affection exist? Did the O'Daniels view Daniel with paternalistic fondness, common among white Southerners who claimed to know their Negroes? Did Daniel view the O'Daniels with genuine friendship or calculated awareness that powerful white connections might prove useful? Probably all of these simultaneously. Human relationships defy simple categorization, particularly relationships formed across massive power imbalances. What's clear is that Daniel watched cowboys. The men who worked cattle for the O'Daniels and other ranchers represented freedom in ways that resonated with a boy trapped in field labor. The cowboys moved. They traveled hundreds of miles on cattle drives. They possessed skills, roping, riding, bronc breaking, that commanded respect and decent wages. Many cowboys were black, Mexican, or mixed race. The work wasn't excluded based on skin color the way many occupations did. A competent cowboy could find employment regardless of background. The job offered exactly what cotton chopping didn't: mobility, skill development, respect, and wages that might accumulate into something. Daniel decided that would be his path. He just needed an opportunity. The decision to run away came slowly, built across years of watching and planning. Daniel couldn't simply announce his intention to become a cowboy. Mary would have objected, fearing for her son's safety and viewing field labor, however brutal, as steady work. The O'Daniels might have prevented his departure, viewing him as reliable labor they didn't want to lose. So Daniel waited and watched. He learned which cattle drives passed near the O'Daniel property and when. He understood that spring drives heading northwest toward markets required extra hands. He knew that cowboys sometimes hired replacements along routes when men quit or fell to injury. If he could reach a drive at the right moment, talk his way into a job before anyone could stop him, he might escape cotton fields forever. March 1876 brought that opportunity. Daniel was 15, tall and lanky but strong from years of field work. A cattle drive assembling near Flatonia planned to push nearly 300 miles northwest toward Buffalo Gap. Daniel heard about it, cowboys talked, word spread through communities, and made his choice. Before dawn one March morning, he packed nothing because he owned nothing worth packing. He left the cabin where Mary slept, left the O'Daniel plantation, and walked toward where the drive was assembling. The pre-dawn darkness provided cover. By the time anyone noticed his absence, he'd be gone. Talking his way onto the drive required nerve. The trail boss, the man responsible for moving hundreds of cattle across hundreds of miles through weather, terrain, and potential conflicts, didn't need charity cases. He needed competent hands who wouldn't quit, panic during stampedes, or fail when exhaustion set in. Daniel had no experience with cattle drives. He had never roped from horseback. His riding skills were limited to what he'd picked up around the plantation. But he had size, obvious physical strength, and desperation that translated into willingness to work harder than anyone. He offered to wrangle horses, the lowest position on any drive, responsible for managing the remuda, spare horses, throughout the day and night, ensuring cowboys had fresh mounts. Wranglers woke first, slept last, and did work nobody else wanted. The trail boss looked at this tall teenager and made a calculation. Even if the kid proved useless with cattle, he could probably handle horses. He hired him. The drive from Flatonia to Buffalo Gap tested every assumption Daniel had made about cowboy life. The romance he'd imagined, riding across open country, freedom and adventure, evaporated in the reality of 18-hour days, inadequate sleep, terrible food, and physical demands exceeding even cotton field labor. Wrangling the remuda meant constant vigilance. Horses wandered if not watched. They spooked at sounds. They needed to be available when cowboys required fresh mounts, which happened multiple times daily as horses tired from work. Daniel learned by failing. Horses escaped his watch and had to be tracked down. He fell from the saddle repeatedly during the first weeks, his limited riding skills exposed. Cowboys mocked him. Standard treatment for green hands, designed to toughen or drive them away. Daniel took the mockery and kept working. But Daniel also learned. He watched how experienced wranglers managed horses, how they anticipated problems before horses scattered, how they positioned themselves to control the remuda efficiently. He studied how cowboys roped, how they positioned horses during work, how they read cattle behavior. Every night after completing his wrangling duties, he practiced with spare rope, building muscle memory for throws. His riding improved through necessity. Falling hurt, and avoiding falls meant learning faster. Within weeks, he could stay mounted on most horses. Within months, he was competent. The trail boss noticed competence was rare enough to warrant recognition. The drive reached Buffalo Gap after nearly 3 months. Daniel had survived. More than survived. He'd proven capable. The trail boss paid him $15 at drive's end, the largest amount of money Daniel had ever possessed. More importantly, the trail boss told other ranchers that the kid could work. That reputation mattered more than the $15. Within days of reaching Buffalo Gap, Daniel found another job with Sam Golson, a rancher needing hands for work in West Texas. Golson hired him based on the trail boss's recommendation. Daniel never returned to cotton fields. The next 2 years established patterns that would define Daniel's career. He worked for multiple ranchers. Sam Golson, then John Munn's NUN outfit on the headwaters of the Brazos River. Each job built skills and reputation. None particularly valued Daniel's abilities with difficult horses. Breaking broncs, training wild or untrained horses to accept saddles and riders, required strength, timing, and willingness to get thrown repeatedly until the horse submitted. Daniel excelled. He had the physical tools, height, strength, balance, and the mental toughness to keep climbing back on horses that threw him violently. Nunn's outfit branded cattle with a large 80 inches on their sides. Working that brand, Daniel started hearing 80 John as a nickname. It stuck. But in 1878, a letter reached Daniel through networks that connected black communities across Texas. Mary Barber, his mother, was dying. She'd bought a few acres near the O'Daniel place, a small achievement representing years of saving from meager wages. Now she was sick, the illness terminal. Daniel rode back to Victoria County immediately, pushing horses hard to cover distance quickly. He arrived too late. Mary had died days before. The loss hit hard. Daniel settled her small estate, ensuring the land she'd bought transferred properly to her heirs. Then he returned to West Texas, carrying grief and determination. His mother had died owning land. He would do the same, but on a scale that would have seemed impossible to a woman who spent most of her life enslaved. Clay Mann was different from other ranchers Daniel had encountered. Born in Texas in the 1840s, Mann had built his cattle empire through methods typical of frontier entrepreneurs, starting small, taking risks, occasionally using violence when business required it. Legend claimed Mann killed his father's murderer as a teenager. The whether legend matched truth remained unclear. What was certain was Mann's success. By the time Daniel met him in late 1878, Mann controlled tens of thousands of cattle across properties in Mitchell, Coleman, and Kent counties. He also owned ranches in New Mexico, Wyoming, and Mexico, a 600,000 acres spread south of the border. Mann represented exactly what Daniel aspired to become, a man who controlled land and cattle at scale, who commanded respect, whose business acumen created wealth. Mann hired Daniel initially as a standard cowhand. The work was familiar: riding, roping, branding, all the tasks that cattle operations required. But Mann watched his employees carefully, assessing not just their cowboy skills, but their character and intelligence. He noticed Daniel's work ethic, the willingness to take on difficult tasks, to work longer hours, to handle responsibilities without constant supervision. He noticed Daniel's questions. Most cowboys simply did assigned tasks without thinking much about the broader business of ranching. Daniel asked why cattle were branded certain ways, how Mann decided when to sell, what factors affected prices. Mann recognized someone trying to learn, not just work for wages. The relationship evolved into something beyond typical employer-employee dynamics. Mann had a problem. He loved gambling and drinking. Mexican Montier, a card game popular in cattle towns, absorbed thousands of dollars. Mann might win $10,000 in a night's gambling, then lose $15,000 the next night. His wife Mary, managing family finances from their Mitchell County home, needed someone reliable to deliver money from cattle sales. Trail drive profits often came in cash, tens of thousands of dollars that needed to reach Mary for bank deposit. Sending such amounts with someone unreliable meant losing it to gambling, theft, or simple negligence. Mann needed someone who didn't drink, didn't gamble, and could be trusted with enormous sums. Daniel fit perfectly. He didn't drink, a rarity among cowboys, where alcohol consumption was nearly universal. He didn't gamble. He'd seen enough men lose wages in card games to recognize that wealth wasn't built that way. Mann began entrusting him with money deliveries. First small amounts, testing reliability. Then larger sums. Eventually, Mann sent Daniel on 3-day rides carrying $30,000 in cash, equivalent to nearly $900,000 in current money. A man with that much cash could disappear, start new life elsewhere, make himself wealthy through one betrayal. Daniel always delivered every dollar. That trustworthiness built a bond that transcended normal business relationships. Mann also recognized Daniel's ambition to own land and cattle. During conversations on long rides, Daniel made clear he didn't want to remain a hired hand forever. Most cowboys accepted that fate: decent wages, steady work, but never owning the cattle they moved or the land they crossed. Daniel wanted what Mann had: property and herds that generated wealth, rather than just wages. Mann proposed an arrangement unprecedented in their relationship. He would pay Daniel $5 monthly from his $30 wage. The remaining $25 would be set aside, held by Mann, and used to purchase cattle for Daniel's account. Mann would provide free pasture for Daniel's growing herd until Daniel acquired his own land. But cattle would be branded with Daniel's mark and counted as his property. When both herds went to market, Daniel would receive his share of proceeds. The arrangement required trust from both men. Daniel had to trust that Mann would actually set aside the $25, rather than gambling it away, would buy cattle as promised, and would keep honest accounting of which animals belonged to whom. Mann had to trust that Daniel wouldn't quit mid-agreement, leaving Mann with cattle he'd purchased for an employee who disappeared. But trust existed. They'd built it through years of working together, through money deliveries always made honestly, through demonstrated character. The partnership began in 1880. For 2 years, Daniel lived on reduced wages while his herd grew. Mann purchased steers, young cattle that would increase in value as they matured, and branded them with Wallace stretched from hip to shoulder. The cattle grazed alongside Mann's herds, eating the same grass, receiving the same care, but owned by a black cowboy building toward independence. By 1882, Daniel had accumulated enough cattle to consider his next move. He needed land. Mann advised strongly: buy railroad land while it's available. The Texas and Pacific Railway was selling parcels along its route to raise capital and encourage settlement. These weren't gifts. The railroad charged market prices, but they represented opportunity. Texas was opening its interior to development, and men who bought early would benefit as population and commerce expanded. Daniel listened. In 1885, when he was 25 years old, he purchased 1,280 acres of railroad land southeast of Lorain in Mitchell County. The purchase price consumed most of his cattle sale proceeds and required taking on debt. But he owned land. A man born as property now held title to property. The psychological weight of that transformation shaped everything that followed. Owning land and owning cattle didn't automatically translate into success as a rancher. Daniel understood this through watching Mann and other successful cattlemen. They could read, they could write. They handled contracts, managed legal documents, kept business records, and navigated financial systems that required literacy. Daniel had never attended school beyond perhaps first grade, and that minimal education had occurred years earlier. He could barely read. His writing skills were rudimentary. If he tried operating as a rancher at that level, he'd be dependent on others to handle paperwork, vulnerable to being cheated, unable to verify that contracts said what others claimed. He needed education. Finding a school that would admit a 25-year-old black man as a second grader proved challenging. Most schools had age limits. Teachers weren't equipped to handle adults learning alongside children. But Daniel heard about a segregated black school in Navarro County, almost 300 miles east of his newly purchased Mitchell County land. That might make exceptions. He traveled there, explained his situation, and gained admission as a second grader. The experience was humbling. Sitting at a desk sized for children, learning lessons that 7-year-olds mastered, struggling with reading primers and basic arithmetic, while knowing he was years behind, But humiliation mattered less than results. Daniel attended through 2 winters, 1885, 1886, and 1887, returning to ranch work during other seasons. By the end of the second winter, he could read newspapers, write letters, handle the mathematics necessary for business transactions, and manage basic contracts. The education was elementary but functional. Navarro County provided more than literacy. Daniel met Laura D. Owens, a teacher finishing high school and planning to teach after graduation. Their courtship developed through that winter of 1886, 1887. Laura represented something Daniel had never had: formal education, family stability, and social standing within the black community. She was the daughter of property owners, had attended school consistently, and planned a respectable career. Daniel was a rough cowboy, nearly illiterate until recently, who smelled of horses and leather. The match seemed unlikely, but Daniel possessed qualities that impressed: ambition backed by concrete achievements, land ownership at age 25, and relationships with powerful white ranchers that suggested business acumen beyond normal expectations. Laura saw potential beyond the rough exterior. They married April 8, 1888. Laura was 18, barely out of high school. Daniel was 27, established as a landowner, but still building his cattle operation. The marriage began in a 2-room house with dugout cellar on one of Clay Mann's ranches, where Daniel continued working while managing his own property. Laura accepted this arrangement, living in modest circumstances, waiting for Daniel's ranch to become profitable enough to support them independently. She also became his business partner. Her education meant she could handle contracts and legal documents better than Daniel, despite his 2 winters of schooling. She managed ranch accounts when Daniel traveled on cattle drives. She negotiated with suppliers and buyers. The partnership extended far beyond traditional marriage roles. Mann's death in 1889 shocked everyone. He was still relatively young, still actively managing his ranching empire. His passing left Mary Mann widowed, with 2 young sons and vast properties to manage. Daniel continued working for Mary Mann for another decade, helping manage operations while running his own growing ranch. Mann's sons needed training in cowboy skills and ranching business. Daniel provided that training, teaching the sons of his former employer how to ride, rope, and understand cattle operations. The arrangement illustrated the complexity of racial dynamics in frontier Texas. A black man training white boys in essential skills, serving as de facto foreman, while Mary Mann retained formal authority, building relationships that continued decades after Clay Mann's death. The Wallace and Mann families maintained connections into modern times, suggesting genuine bonds formed despite massive racial and social barriers. Daniel's own operation expanded steadily through the 1890s. He purchased additional land parcels as finances allowed. His herd grew through careful management, buying young cattle when prices were low, selling mature animals when markets favored sellers, retaining breeding stock to grow the herd naturally. He branded his Durham cattle with a D triangle, his Herefords with a D on the right hip and running W on the side. These brands became recognized throughout Mitchell County. Other ranchers knew A.T. John's cattle, knew his reputation for fair dealing, knew he could be trusted in transactions. That reputation mattered enormously. The cattle business operated partly on trust agreements, made verbally, cattle exchanged on handshakes, debts paid based on personal honor. A rancher known as dishonest or unreliable faced business obstacles that destroyed operations regardless of land or cattle quality. The 2 winters Daniel spent in Navarro County, sitting in classrooms learning alongside children, represented more than academic education. They represented a decision that separated him from most cowboys of his generation. Returning to school at 25 meant acknowledging inadequacy, admitting he lacked essential knowledge despite years of successful work. Most men couldn't make that admission. Pride prevented it. Fear of humiliation prevented it. Comfort with existing skills prevented it. Daniel swallowed pride because he understood business reality. Illiterate ranchers remained dependent on others, vulnerable to exploitation, unable to verify contracts or financial statements. He was building something too important to leave vulnerable. The curriculum was elementary but comprehensive. Reading instruction started with basic phonics and simple texts, progressing to newspapers and contracts. Writing instruction emphasized penmanship, producing legible letters and numbers, alongside composition skills for business correspondence. Arithmetic covered addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, fractions, and percentages necessary for calculating cattle prices, interest rates, and profit margins. Geography lessons provided understanding of Texas regions, railroad routes, and market locations. The knowledge was practical, focused on skills that ranchers and businessmen needed daily. Daniel approached education with the same intensity he brought to bronc breaking. He practiced writing for hours, filling pages with letters until his hand cramped, repeating exercises until penmanship improved. He read every newspaper and book available, expanding vocabulary and comprehension. He worked arithmetic problems obsessively, checking solutions repeatedly until calculations became automatic. His classmates were children who giggled at the tall adult struggling with lessons they found easy. Daniel ignored the mockery. He was competing against his own ignorance, not against 7-year-olds. By the second winter's end, he could read contract terms, write business letters, calculate profit margins, and handle the paperwork that ranching required. The investment of 2 winters paid returns for the rest of his life. Laura's education exceeded Daniel's dramatically. She'd completed high school, an achievement rare for anyone in 1880s rural Texas, exceptional for a black woman. Her family had prioritized education despite the costs and difficulties. That background shaped Laura's role in the Wallace partnership. She became the literate partner who handled complex documents, corresponded with lawyers and bankers, researched legal questions, and managed record-keeping. Daniel made business decisions: which land to buy, which cattle to sell, when to expand operations. But Laura executed those decisions through proper legal and financial channels. The division of labor maximized both partners' strengths. The marriage produced 4 children across the 1890s, 3 daughters and a son. Laura insisted they receive educations that she and Daniel lacked. The daughters would attend high school and potentially college. The son would receive training in both ranching and academic subjects. Education became a Wallace family value, a legacy that Daniel and Laura built deliberately. Daniel told his children about chopping cotton, about running away at 15, about learning to read at 25. He wanted them to understand that education wasn't optional luxury, but essential tool for building and protecting wealth. The message took hold. All 4 children received extensive educations. Their children, Daniel's grandchildren, attended college. Education became the family's permanent investment across generations. The 1890s brought both expansion and near catastrophe to Daniel's ranching operation. He acquired land steadily through the decade, purchasing parcels when finances allowed. Each purchase required careful calculation. Land cost money that could otherwise buy cattle or equipment, but land was finite. Texas was opening to settlement, and parcels near railroads and water sources would become increasingly expensive or unavailable. Daniel followed Mann's advice: buy when you can, because opportunity won't last. By 1900, he controlled multiple sections totaling thousands of acres. Some was purchased outright. Some was leased from railroads or other landowners. The combination gave him grazing capacity for expanding herds. Windmills revolutionized ranching across West Texas during the 1890s, and Daniel adopted the technology early. West Texas water sources were unreliable. Creeks dried seasonally. Springs failed during droughts. Windmills pumped groundwater consistently, providing reliable water for cattle regardless of surface conditions. Daniel installed windmills across his properties, gaining reputation as an innovator. Neighboring ranchers watched his results, then installed their own windmills. The technology allowed stocking more cattle per acre, expanding herds beyond what natural water sources could support. Daniel's cattle numbers grew accordingly. By the late 1890s, he ran several hundred head, not yet approaching the thousands that largest ranchers controlled, but substantial enough to generate significant income. The drought of 1894 nearly destroyed everything. West Texas rainfall varied dramatically year to year. Wet years brought abundant grass, healthy cattle, and profitable sales. Dry years meant scarce grass, thin cattle, and losses. The drought that hit in 1893, 1894 exceeded normal dry cycles. Grass disappeared. Cattle weakened. Water sources failed even with windmills pumping, as groundwater levels dropped. Ranchers faced brutal choices: sell cattle at depressed prices before they died of starvation, or hold and hope rains came before herds perished. Daniel needed capital to survive, money to purchase feed, to maintain operations until weather improved, to avoid forced sales at disastrous prices. He approached banks for loans. Banking relationships presented challenges for black ranchers that white ranchers didn't face. Loan officers viewed black borrowers skeptically, assuming higher risk regardless of collateral or business history. Daniel had land and cattle worth far more than the loan he requested, but banks hesitated. Finally, a white rancher. Accounts differ on exactly who co-signed a $10,000 note, guaranteeing Daniel's debt with his own credit. That act of support, crossing racial boundaries in Jim Crow Texas, allowed Daniel to survive the drought. He purchased feed for cattle. He maintained operations through 1894 and into 1895. When rains finally returned, his herds recovered. He repaid the loan in full. The episode illustrated both the racial barriers Daniel faced and the personal relationships that sometimes created exceptions to those barriers. A white rancher willing to risk $10,000 on a black neighbor's success represented something beyond casual acquaintance. It suggested genuine respect earned through years of proven reliability. Daniel continued expanding through the late 1890s and early 1900s. He joined the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, the primary industry organization protecting ranchers' interests, prosecuting cattle thieves, and facilitating market access. Membership required application and approval. The association accepted Daniel in 1905, and he maintained membership for 30 years until his death. He attended association meetings regularly, traveling to Fort Worth on segregated trains where black passengers rode in separate colored sections. On one such trip, a group of white ranchers, men who knew Daniel from years of working together, came back to the colored section to talk with him during the journey. The scene captured the contradictions: legally mandated segregation enforced on the train, but personal relationships that transcended those legal barriers within the confines of private conversation. Daniel's reputation spread beyond Mitchell County. Ranchers across West Texas knew 80 John Wallace, knew his cattle brands, knew his word was reliable, knew he operated with integrity that made him a trustworthy business partner. The reputation translated into economic advantage. Buyers preferred purchasing from ranchers they trusted. Sellers offered better terms to reliable customers. Business networks opened because other ranchers vouched for Daniel's character. By 1910, Daniel Wallace operated as an established, respected member of West Texas ranching community, a status almost unthinkable for a man born enslaved 50 years earlier. The 1894 drought exposed vulnerabilities in even successful ranching operations. Daniel's survival depended on accessing capital from lenders skeptical of black borrowers. The white rancher who co-signed his note took genuine financial risk. If Daniel defaulted, the co-signer would owe $10,000. That level of trust didn't develop casually. It emerged from years of Daniel demonstrating reliability, honoring agreements, and building reputation for integrity. When crisis came, that reputation translated into concrete help that saved his business. Repaying the loan became a point of pride. Daniel ensured every payment arrived on time. He prioritized debt service over other expenses, recognizing that his creditworthiness depended on perfect repayment. When the final payment cleared, his credit rating improved dramatically. He'd proven he could borrow large sums and repay them completely despite severe business challenges. Future borrowing became easier. Banks that had hesitated initially now viewed him as proven borrower. The drought's long-term effect was strengthening Daniel's financial position despite the immediate crisis. The episode also illustrated the interdependence of West Texas ranching community. Ranchers of all backgrounds faced similar challenges: weather, market fluctuations, cattle diseases, and financial pressures. Those who helped neighbors during crises often received reciprocal help when their own troubles came. Daniel participated fully in this mutual aid system. When neighboring ranchers faced difficulties, he provided assistance when possible, extending credit for cattle purchases, lending equipment, sharing water sources during dry periods. The help flowed in both directions, creating networks of obligation and support that transcended racial barriers when economic interests aligned. Daniel's survival strategy emphasized diversification. He didn't just run cattle. He placed approximately 2,200 of his acres under cultivation, growing cotton and other crops that provided income even when cattle prices fell. The cultivation also generated feed crops that reduced dependence on purchasing feed during droughts. He leased some land to other ranchers, creating rental income streams independent of cattle markets. He invested in equipment, windmills, fencing, corrals that could be depreciated over years while providing ongoing utility. The diversification meant no single crisis could destroy his entire operation. Cattle losses hurt, but didn't bankrupt him. Crop failures were painful, but didn't eliminate his income. The approach reflected sophisticated understanding of risk management unusual for ranchers of any background during that era. The discovery of oil on Wallace land transformed the family's economic situation completely. The exact date of discovery isn't clear from historical records, but it occurred sometime in the 1920s or early 1930s, after Daniel had already established himself a successful rancher, but before the Great Depression's worst years. Oil production in Mitchell County wasn't among Texas's largest fields, but even modest production generated enormous revenue compared to cattle ranching. A single producing well could earn more annually than hundreds of cattle. Multiple wells meant wealth at scales Daniel had never contemplated during his cowboy decades. The oil money allowed construction of a substantial home in Colorado City, the Mitchell County seat. Daniel and Laura built an 8-room modern house, electricity, indoor plumbing, all the amenities that frontier ranch houses lacked. The decision to build in town rather than on the ranch reflected priorities. The children needed access to good schools. Colorado City's educational facilities, while segregated, offered more advanced instruction than rural schools. Daniel and Laura wanted their children prepared for college. Living in town made that possible. The ranch remained operational. Daniel still managed cattle operations, still rode out to inspect herds, but the family's primary residence shifted to town. Oil revenue didn't make Daniel lazy or disconnected from ranching. He continued active management into his 70s. He still broke horses until age 70, remarkable given that bronc breaking was young man's work that destroyed bodies. His toughness became legendary. The Great Depression that devastated most American farmers and ranchers barely touched Daniel's operations. He owned land free of debt. The oil revenue had allowed paying off all mortgages. His cattle operation was profitable independent of oil income. He sold 75 head to the government during the Great Depression's agricultural relief programs, but unlike many ranchers, he wasn't forced to participate. He did so voluntarily, helping the program while receiving fair payment. During the Depression's height in 1936, Daniel stated matter-of-factly that he owned 14½ sections of land and 600 head of cattle, over 9,000 acres, and a substantial herd maintained through economic catastrophe that destroyed thousands of other ranching operations. The oil wealth also enabled philanthropy that Daniel and Laura had long planned. They supported their church generously. They helped family members with education expenses. They provided loans to other black families trying to purchase land or start businesses. The assistance was often quiet. Daniel didn't publicize charitable giving, but communities knew who helped when help was needed. That generosity built goodwill and respect that transcended his business reputation. People knew A.T. John as someone who remembered where he came from, who helped others climb the same ladders he'd climbed. By the late 1930s, Daniel Webster Wallace had become a living legend in West Texas. His story was known across the region, the former slave who became a millionaire rancher. Newspapers published profiles. Historians collected his reminiscences. Younger generations heard tales of his early cattle drive days, his partnership with Clay Mann, his success in business. The narrative had inspirational quality that appealed across racial lines. White Texans could cite Daniel as proof that opportunity existed for those willing to work hard, conveniently ignoring the structural barriers he'd overcome and the exceptional circumstances that allowed his success. Black Texans saw him as demonstration that excellence and determination could command respect even in racist systems, while recognizing that his path wasn't easily replicable. Clay Mann's willingness to partner with a black cowboy wasn't universal among white ranchers. and access to capital during the 1894 drought depended on relationships most black ranchers couldn't develop. Daniel remained active until the very end. In late March 1939, at age 78, he rode to the Lorraine post office on his favorite horse, Blondie. The 6-mile round trip was routine. He'd made it hundreds of times. But that day, after collecting his mail, he lacked strength to mount without help. White men who saw him struggling came over to lift him onto Blondie. The scene illustrated both his physical decline and the respect he'd earned. In Depression-era Texas, where racial segregation was legally enforced and social mixing across racial lines was discouraged, white men helping a black man mount his horse wasn't normal. But Daniel wasn't normal. He'd built a reputation that transcended standard racial categories through 6 decades of exemplary conduct and proven success. Days later, on March 28, 1939, Daniel died. His final words were addressed to his mother Mary, dead over 60 years. He told her he was coming to join her. The moment carried weight beyond its obvious emotional content. Mary had died owning a few acres purchased through decades of brutal labor starting in slavery. Daniel died owning over 9,000 acres, worth over $1 million, with children and grandchildren educated and positioned for success. The transformation across one generation, from enslaved woman dying with tiny land parcel to son dying wealthy beyond what she could have imagined, captured both Daniel's exceptional achievements and the possibilities that emancipation had created. His estate inventory revealed the scope of what he'd built. The land alone, 14.5 sections totaling 9,280 acres, was valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars. The cattle herd of 600 head represented substantial additional value. Oil leases and mineral rights provided ongoing revenue streams. Equipment, improvements, and other assets added to the total. The final valuation exceeded $1 million, equivalent to roughly $22 million in current purchasing power. One obituary called him one of the most progressive ranchers and farmers in Mitchell County, white or Negro, a statement remarkable for treating his achievements as comparable to the most successful white ranchers, implicitly acknowledging that race hadn't prevented him from reaching the top tier of regional agriculture. Daniel and Laura were buried on the first section of land Daniel purchased in 1885, the 1,280 acres that represented his initial property ownership. The burial site carried symbolic weight. This was where the transformation from hired cowboy to property owner had begun. This was the land that made everything else possible. The descendants who still run the Wallace Ranch maintain the cemetery on that original section. The original homestead house, a cross-shaped board and batten structure built around 1900, was donated to the National Ranching Heritage Center at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, where it's preserved and displayed as monument to Daniel's achievements. Colorado City named a school after him, recognizing his significance to the community. In 2002-03, he was inducted into the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum's Hall of Great Westerners, formal recognition that his contributions to Western history warranted permanent commemoration. The full picture of Daniel Webster Wallace's life reveals complexities that simple inspirational narratives miss. He succeeded partly through exceptional personal qualities, intelligence, work ethic, business acumen, physical toughness, but also through opportunities that most black Texans of his generation didn't receive. Clay Mann's willingness to partner with him, to set aside wages for cattle purchases, to provide free pasture, created possibilities that weren't available to black cowboys working for employers who viewed them purely as hired labor. The white rancher who co-signed his $10,000 loan provided access to capital that banks wouldn't provide based solely on Daniel's collateral and credit history. These acts of support across racial lines made Daniel's success possible. They occurred because Daniel had proven himself worthy of trust through years of demonstrated competence and integrity, but they also required white allies willing to take risks that many of their peers wouldn't take. Daniel never forgot the barriers he'd overcome or the help he'd received. His philanthropy focused heavily on education, supporting schools, helping young black students attend college, emphasizing to his own children and grandchildren that education provided protection against exploitation and enabled advancement. He understood that his illiteracy until age 25 had been vulnerability that could have prevented business success. He ensured later generations wouldn't face that vulnerability. 3 generations of Wallace descendants attended college, building professional careers in education, business, and other fields. That educational legacy represents perhaps Daniel's most enduring impact, establishing family expectations and providing resources that enabled descendants to build on rather than repeat his achievements. His story also reveals the limitations of individual excellence as solution to systemic racism. Daniel was exceptional, smarter than most cowboys, tougher than most bronc riders, more business savvy than most ranchers. He made virtually no mistakes across 60 years of ranching career. He built relationships with powerful white allies. He navigated Jim Crow Texas while maintaining dignity and building wealth. And he achieved success that placed him among the top tier of West Texas ranchers. Yet for every Daniel Webster Wallace who succeeded at that level, thousands of equally hardworking, intelligent black cowboys and farmers faced barriers they couldn't overcome. The existence of exceptional success stories doesn't disprove systemic barriers. It often obscures them by suggesting that failure results from inadequate personal effort rather than structural obstacles. The question remains whether Wallace's legacy offers lessons beyond his specific historical context. The cowboy culture of 1870s to 1890s Texas that allowed competence to sometimes trump racial barriers has largely disappeared. Modern employment markets operate differently, with credentials and educational requirements that Daniel never faced. Agricultural economies have been mechanized and consolidated in ways that make small-scale ranching difficult for anyone starting without capital. The specific path Wallace followed, working as cowhand, saving wages, purchasing land, building cattle operation, benefiting from oil discovery, isn't replicable in modern Texas or anywhere else. But perhaps the broader pattern remains relevant, identifying where opportunities exist within constrained circumstances, building relationships across barriers, acquiring skills that create value, managing risk carefully, and investing in next generation's capabilities. Those principles worked for Wallace across 60 years, from 1876 to 1939. Whether they work now depends on circumstances that vary dramatically across individuals and contexts. When you step back and look at the full picture, Daniel Webster Wallace accomplished something genuinely remarkable. He transformed from enslaved child to millionaire rancher across one lifetime, a journey requiring exceptional ability, relentless work, careful planning, good fortune, and willingness to take calculated risks. He built economic empire that survived into 4th generation. He commanded respect from ranchers across racial lines. Through demonstrated competence and integrity, he created educational legacy that enabled descendants to build professional success. His life embodied both the possibilities that emancipation created and the enormous barriers that accompanied those possibilities. Born at precisely the right moment, young enough after emancipation to have an entire career ahead, but old enough to experience slavery's reality, he exploited timing alongside talent to achieve outcomes that seemed impossible from his starting position. The story deserves recognition, not as simple inspiration, but as complex historical testimony about race, opportunity, and individual agency in post-Civil War America.